what I just asked you is, what do you know about deaf people? Many of us don't know a lot about deaf people because they're a very secluded group of people that don't venture out much because they don't feel like they're accepted. According to WHO.int, there are 300 million deaf or hard of hearing people in the world. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a family with 2 deaf parents and got to see that culture from the inside out. And let me tell you, it's a fantastic culture. But there's a lot of misconceptions about the deaf that I want to address today with you. I want to talk to you about one misconception of that the deaf think they're disabled. 2, that the deaf are all alike. Once you see one deaf person, you've seen them all. And 3, that it's easy for the deaf to find Jesus just like it is for a hearing person. The first misconception, that the deaf consider themselves disabled. That is just totally false. The only difference between a hearing person and a deaf person is that they can't hear. They pay bills, they have steady jobs, they drive cars, they pay taxes, they raise kids, just like a normal person. We wouldn't call somebody from Mexico who speaks Spanish disabled because he can't speak English, and it's the same thing about the deaf person. Another misconception about them is the use of cochlear implants. The hearing world is almost making them adapt to the hearing, and that's really offensive in the deaf culture. They don't like this because it's causing the deaf to lose the uniqueness of their characteristics, and that's just who they are. They don't want to be anybody else. And I found a lot of that information on deaflinks.com. They want to be accepted just like a hearing person is accepted. Accept them for who they are, not change them and make them adapt to us. Let's adapt to them. Another misconception is that once you see one deaf person, you've seen them all. They're all alike. And that's not true. There are over 100 deaf sign languages around the world. In America, when you sign water, it's one thing. But when you go to Mexico, it's totally different. Or go to Russia, it's totally different. And that makes it unique in just its own part right there. But on top of that, they have their own political views. When you see a Christian person, you automatically think, oh, they're Republican and conservative. But that's not true. There's Democrats, there's Republicans, there's people in the middle, just like the deaf world. They're on either side of the fence. They have their own interests. They have their own personalities. I had a deaf friend of my father's growing up, and when you talk to him one-on-one, it was literally like you were talking to a hearing person. He talked like one, and he reacted like one, but when he turned his back to you, he couldn't hear you at all. And that's amazing to me, for him to be able to just be like normal person, and you thought he was hearing the whole time until he turned his back, and that's amazing to me. The last misconception is that it's easy for the deaf to find God, like you and I, and that's not true at all, because many churches out there don't have deaf ministries. My church, including, doesn't have a deaf ministry. We had 2 high school girls that were coming to our church, and both of them were deaf, and all we had was one lady up front interpreting for them. On top of them having to sit in front row, they were secluded from their friends. They had to be up front so they could understand what was going on. And after church was over, they didn't communicate with everybody else because nobody else knew sign language. So that was awkward enough for them to feel like they weren't accepted. There's one way that I think that's best to reach the deaf culture, besides the church getting involved, is deaf pastors. The deaf will react to a deaf person better than they will react to a hearing person. But the problem with that is there's not many deaf pastors out there. And if they're out there, there's probably only a certain community that they can reach, and they're not getting to the whole world. Another problem with the deaf finding God is 90% of deaf people are born to hearing parents. And of those hearing parents, 92% of them don't know sign language. I found that information out on deafworldministries.com. The problem with that is if their own parents aren't willing to learn sign language, do you think the rest of the world is going to learn it and try to reach out to them? I doubt it, but that's hard news to accept, that their own parents wouldn't even learn sign language with them. I want to tell you in conclusion that of the 300 million people that are in the world that are deaf and hard of hearing, we need to do a better job of trying to reach out to them. Ask your church to start a deaf ministry. Learn sign language. Community colleges are now offering that as a second language. Get with your church and get them to get that ministry going, to reach out to them and do what you can to help them out. Find them in their world and connect with them. And finally, deaf people are just like you and I. They just want to be accepted like everyone else.